It's very nice to be back here in Austin. Thank you all for turning out this afternoon. It's always wonderful to be at ETS. It's a wonderful event, the Energy Thought Summit. Like the new venue here, although I do have to say I was a little disappointed given the fact that there's no marquee. Last year I got my name on the marquee with Steve Wozniak. You know, it was kind of cool. I took that picture for my two computer geek sons back home, and I finally raised my my stature with my sons for the first time because I was on the marquee with Steve Wozniak. But in any case, it's fun to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit for 25 minutes or so, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions about what I'm seeing in megatrends, convergence, markets, customers, and policy, things coming together to some degree, or at least things all being thrown in the pot, I guess, and a lot of disruption happening in the industry, in the utility industry, that I've been around or involved in or have had some contact with in one way or the other for the last 40 years. And I can truly say that in the last 5 years, and especially in the last 2 or 3 actually, I've seen more changes and more disruption, more activity than any time in the 40 years that I've been involved in the industry. So if we look at, just what's happening with markets in energy and some trends there with respect to those markets, I mean, we're seeing, great changes from what we know as the traditional infrastructure, and there's still plenty of this infrastructure around, still plenty of the central station generation plants, the large transmission lines, distribution lines, and the traditional ways of delivering energy services to customers. That hasn't all gone away, certainly, but it is rapidly changing, and it's rapidly changing in ways that are having us look to be much more customer-centric. So things that are happening in the energy field are really happening much more at the customer level than they're happening at the level of the utilities. You're really seeing customers making very, very significant changes. This particular picture means a lot to me. This is the MGM Resorts City Center project in Las Vegas. This project was completed in 2007, 2008 timeframe. I worked on the project prior to going to FERC. I went to FERC in 2006, and I worked on this project. The MGM Resorts was a client of mine and helped them with, this is multi-hotel casinos and resort property in an 11 million square foot commercial project. It was the largest commercial project at the time in the United States. It may still be the largest commercial project that was constructed. And it is the largest LEED project in the United States. The entire project is LEED certified. The project also contains a cogen system as well to provide some of the power for the system. For the project does not provide all the power, but it is a large, extremely large commercial hotel resort complex in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. What's so interesting about this project to me is the fact that even though the project was completed only 5 or 6 years ago, they've now gone through the entire project. In fact, they're going through all of the MGM Resorts properties, and they're changing out all of the lighting systems because the lighting systems have changed that quickly. That rapid transformation in the ability to move to more efficient end-use systems is such that it's economical for MGM Resorts to go through and redo their lighting. Here's another disruption that we're seeing in the industry, and it really is a disruption that's happening, again, primarily on the customer side of the meter and not a disruption in these energy markets so much on the utility side of the meter, and this is new battery technologies. This is a company called Aquion out of Pittsburgh that has a very attractive form factor of a battery that can be used in distributed applications. It can be used also and scaled up in utility scale applications as well, although I think the distributed applications are probably the most attractive overall. They've already, as you can see, gone to commercial production. They are producing these batteries in a factory that's a former automobile plant outside of Pittsburgh with robotic machinery. They're placing these batteries in places like Hawaii where people are actually going off-grid because it's more cost-effective to do that now than it is to continue to be hooked up to the grid in that particular jurisdiction. And many places else around the world where these batteries are becoming more and more cost-effective. And it's just one of dozens of companies that have new technologies that are in the battery storage field that are going to continue to expand and continue to disrupt the way that we deliver energy and the way we think about reliability now becoming a local product instead of a regional product from your local utility. Reliability will in fact become something that the customer can control. This woman is Shannon Miller. She's a PhD mechanical engineering graduate from Stanford University, and she and her partner, Adam Simpson, have been developing and are about to commercialize the most efficient distributed natural gas engine in the world. This engine, it's a free piston, high combustion engine that will ultimately have over a 60% efficiency, will in fact compete with fuel cells and probably, in my opinion, blow fuel cells out of the water, and be able to be used in distributed applications at 50 to 100 kilowatts. So think of Walmart's, think of your big box stores, think of all these types of commercial facilities that ultimately can generate their own electricity much cheaper than their local utility company, and do so much more reliably in a much more stable way by having the knowledge that they can have a gas line into their facility and don't have to worry about overhead lines that are subject to ice storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, and a whole series of other climatic events that we're seeing at a more periodic pace over the last 10 to 20 years. Here is the most efficient light bulb that's commercially available. It's an LED light bulb that is at a level of efficiency of 133 lumens per watt. That's how they measured efficiency of lights, how much lumens come out of the particular light by how many watts go in. So at 133 lumens per watt, you compare that to a traditional incandescent light, which is about 15 lumens per watt. You can compare it to a compact fluorescent light, which is 30 to 50 lumens per watt, and even the older LEDs at 90 to 100 lumens per watt. So you got 133 lumens per watt here. We're now seeing Philips Lighting, for example, talking about the ability to, and they've got a bench test lab model, to produce 300 lumens per watt. So what that means is that you used to have a 100-watt light bulb, that you would screw in an incandescent light bulb. Now you can get the same amount of light from a 3-watt light bulb, if you can get 300 lumens per watt, ultimately. So that's changing everything, not only in lighting, but also in other areas, in air conditioning, motors and drives, in a number of other end uses. We're seeing consumers going to a position where they're no longer using continually more and more energy incrementally, but the energy curves are flat. So this has a tremendous impact on the ability of utilities to continue to grow their business. They can't grow their business on more sales because there are no more sales per se. Again, energy use is flat overall. They have to look at other ways potentially to make that business work. And they make money primarily by investing in infrastructure, and the infrastructure they traditionally invested in is power plants. And so if you don't need more power plants, then you can't make those investments. So they're looking at other ways to invest. But markets are changing. The markets are changing for those reasons and for a lot of other reasons as well. Let's look for a minute at the European versus U.S. energy futures and how those two areas of the world are looking at energy overall. I had the fortunate opportunity to visit Germany this last spring, a year ago, and was able to take a helicopter tour from the Baltic Sea to Berlin and saw some of the offshore wind systems there. But more importantly, I saw these onshore wind systems, and this is a shot out of the helicopter. Here you see a number of systems that are currently being put up, new systems that are the largest on-land wind systems in the world. Each one of these turbines is 7.5 megawatts apiece. So we had, turbines in the past were, 500 kilowatts or 1 megawatt. Now we have 7.5 megawatt turbines. And as you're flying across this area of the former East Germany, the eastern part of Germany, you're seeing these turbines all over. And what else you see, this out of the front of the helicopter, this is the largest airfield in Europe, but it's no longer an airfield. This was a Soviet airfield in former Eastern Germany that was converted by the Germans to a solar field. The runway on this field was over 6 kilometers long. And what they did is they covered the entire runway and all of the adjacent areas with solar PV. So they have now here over 150 megawatts of solar PV. So there was a great, deal of angst and concern a couple of days ago when there was a solar eclipse in Europe as to whether or not the Germans could survive the solar eclipse with all the solar energy that they have. Well, they did just fine. Apparently, they did make it through that period where the sun went out of behind the moon for at least a couple hours, and as a result, ultimately, they kept the system operating. We haven't been so lucky in some instances as far as keeping our system operating and the reliability of our system overall. I think our reliability is increasing. FERC put in place rules that were developed by NERC. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation that FERC has designated as the entity to develop rules for reliability. And that was done as pursuant to a 2005 law that was put in place. And so we have now mandatory reliability requirements in this country. Didn't prevent the Super Bowl from being without power a couple of years ago. Also doesn't prevent things like this, unfortunately, from disasters occurring. This is Hurricane Sandy that knocked out a good portion of the Northeast a couple of years ago. And we continue to have these events. From climactic issues. We have these events from other things that incur upon our grid system overall, the reliability of that grid system. And so maintaining that system's reliability is a very difficult and a very expensive job. They're now undergrounding a great number of lines in the District of Columbia. I think it's $1 billion project, last I looked at. And I used to live in D.C. when I was at FERC for 7.5 years. I actually lived in the district, and we had outages all the time. It was, we wondered why, we were paying our electric bill, because there were constant outages. So they are going to underground good portions of it, but it's very, very expensive to do so, to go back and retrofit that system to one that is more reliable. With respect to Europe, though, it was interesting to me, the overall attitude there about efficiency and their overall view of ensuring that their systems that deliver electricity are as efficient as possible. I was in Italy in October, and this is a medieval city in Tuscany that I was walking through one evening, and I took this picture, and I noticed that street light as I took the picture, and so I went up and I looked underneath the street light, and this city is, as I say, from probably the 1200s it was built, but this was an LED street light. They had retrofitted all their lights in the city to LEDs. I mean, that's how quickly they had adopted this new advanced technology to improve the efficiency of their system overall. So, I mean, I think we do fairly well in this country as far as efficiency, but certainly the Europeans are ahead of us. I know a lot of people talk about the Germans. Well, it's wonderful that the Germans have this dedication to 80% renewables by 2050. However, their electric prices are twice as high as ours. That's true, but their bills are lower. And their bills are lower because they don't use as much. They use about half as much as we do on a average monthly basis. So ultimately, they figured out how to keep costs down, and we have to think about costs. We have to think about total costs of delivering energy services and how to make those costs as low as possible by improving efficiency overall and utilizing those services in ways that ultimately can deliver resources to the customer and have the customer use their resources to deliver resources back to the grid, and that's really one of the keys. Well, the other thing we have to worry about is grid security in this country, and I think we have great problems with grid security. Some of you may have saw the USA Today article yesterday in the USA Today. Chairman of FERC was quoted. I was quoted a couple times in it as well. This particular shot is a video frame of a security camera at a place called Metcalf. How many people here have heard of Metcalf? A lot of people know Metcalf, but there's a lot more who don't. Metcalf is a substation that is 3 miles south of San Jose. And on April 16, 2013, a number of individuals, 2 or more, attacked it. Basically, there's no other way to describe it. They basically, at 1 o'clock in the morning, cut a number of fiber optic cables that were about 100, 200 yards away from Metcalf that knocked out all of the 911 traffic. And then they proceeded to walk into a field that was 60 yards outside of the fence from this facility and started shooting with AK-47 type ammunition into a number of transformers, 21 transformers, and they actually knocked out 19 of those transformers by shooting into the cooling fins, and all the cooling oil for those transformers leaked out, and the automatic temperature shutoffs shut off those transformers. It's an incident that we still don't know who did it, why they did it, what their intent was. The FBI says it's not terrorism because the FBI defines terrorism to mean it's purposeful intent linked to a terrorist act. And so since the FBI doesn't know who did it, it can't be terrorism. But in any case, it was somebody who wanted to do a lot of damage, and they did, and a lot of harm, and they were very intentful about it. There's no question about that. This is a picture of something else that concerns me with respect to security. This is the drone they found on the White House lawn. And it kind of, ratchets up the whole security issue. When you have people who have access to these types of devices, and this gentleman has access to one, obviously. He's got the same one that was on the White House, not the exact same one, but the same model of the one that was on the White House. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about what this means for the security of our system and how we keep the vast infrastructure of a very intricately interlinked network system with 3 interconnects: Eastern Interconnect, Western Interconnect, and of course Texas. Texas is not interconnected to the rest of the country strongly, so they're not part of the bulk power system that FERC oversees, except for reliability. But nevertheless, those interconnects, I think, have some vulnerabilities. We're trying to do something about those vulnerabilities. We are ultimately putting in place, FERC has, after I left, put in place rules of physical security under some NERC standards that came to FERC, and FERC adopted those rules and put them in place. Utilities now have to take those standards and rules and utilize them to evaluate their infrastructure, their physical infrastructure, and actually put in place mitigation measures that would stop incidents from occurring. And they're doing that, and they're moving to do that. But ultimately, it still is one that, it's the game of one-upsmanship. You put one barrier in place, and how do you get over that barrier, and if you put another barrier in place, et cetera. And so I'm very concerned about that, concerned about how we can, in fact, ensure that our system is secure and still deliver efficient services at a reasonable cost. Grid efficiency. This is another area, and I'll talk about this at the end of my presentation, but there are billions of dollars out there. In fact, I'd even venture to say tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in efficiency savings, not only on the customer side that the customers are already engaging in, and they're actively engaging in it, just like the MGM resorts that I showed you initially in City Center and what they're already doing to upgrade their lighting just a couple of years after they've built this beautiful new facility. So customers know how to reach over and pick up that dollar bill and put it in their pocket. But I'm not sure that utilities do. There are devices out there, there are hardware and software solutions out there that could make our system much more efficient at the bulk power level and at the distribution level. For example, this box that you're seeing on this pole here is a box that is created by a company called Verintech. It can do some very interesting things. At the distribution level, it can squeeze the voltages. Voltages at a distribution level at the customer feeder side vary anywhere from 245 volts down to 228, which is the ANSI standard. This box basically squeezes those voltages together and then lowers them closer to the ANSI standard. In other words, making those voltages much more controllable and much more predictable and much closer to what is the level that's necessary to run all of the end uses in the customer's facilities. If you can do that, you can save energy. They can save as much as 5% across the board in the distribution system by putting in these devices. Why aren't we putting these devices in everywhere? Well, there's lots of barriers to utilities having incentives to put in these types of things. Maybe, the utilities, again, make money by investing. So maybe it's cheaper for them to do this, but they wouldn't make as much money on doing this versus putting smart meters everywhere. Because this box, for example, cuts out one of the main benefits of a smart meter, and that is doing voltage control. But this can do voltage control at a 5% level. A smart meter can only do it at about a 1.5% level. So this does it, 3 times better than the smart meter. But again, it's less expensive, so the utility doesn't make as much on putting this in as they make on putting a smart meter. Here's another example. Here's actually, and shows you how this device does it basically. The top graph on the left-hand side shows you voltages spread over a substation. The bottom graph shows you how this device, in essence, can squeeze those voltages into a much smaller plane, ultimately. Here's another device by another company called Smart Wire. This device doesn't go on the distribution level, this goes on the transmission level. This actually goes on transmission lines. It's a box that clamps on a transmission line that has a number of electronic components within it that can be dynamically, can be communicated to and dynamically signaled by the grid operator. Device currently is on the lines of a number of very well-known utilities, TVA, Southern Company, for example, two, for example. What the device does is they can signal the box, the grid operator who's operating the lines, and dynamically change the impedance of the line. By changing the impedance of the line, that ultimately means that they can push or pull more or less power through the line, effectively making this box a flow gate. So if you can make a flow gate in a line and do it rather cheaply, because this same type of activity can be done not quite dynamically, but can be done in a substation with extremely expensive equipment and a much larger footprint than this. But this can be done much more cheaply with this and much more rapidly these can be deployed and also can be done much more dynamically. If you can do that, you can ultimately reduce congestion, reduce costs, and improve efficiency of transmission lines. But again, what does the utility want to do? Well, the utility, and again, I'm not faulting the utility, I'm just simply saying this is the structure that they live under, so it's their obligation to try to maximize the profits for their shareholders, and by doing that, they obviously move towards those kinds of activities that do that. So if they could put these on their lines and reduce congestion and result in throughput that would be sufficient for the next 10 years, would they do that? Or instead put in a transmission line that costs 10 times as much that would do the same thing? Well, they would make 10 times as much money off the transmission line if they put the transmission line, because it costs 10 times as much. So ultimately, the bias is going to be towards, not looking at this technology, but looking at solutions that may have a higher cost. So, so how do we move around these things? How can we move to more efficient solutions overall? Well, the utilities, again, not only have these issues with respect to their incentives, but they also have the issues with, as I already talked about, the flattening of the loads, the flattening of their sales overall, and most utilities do make money from sales, although there is decoupling in some states that decouples revenues from sales, and again, then they only make money on additional investments. But the other thing that utilities are seeing these things go in about once every 3 minutes. Someone is putting one of these on a rooftop in this country. This one's on my rooftop in Berkeley, California. I put it in August of this year. There's the output that I get every day on my iPhone, that I can see how much I use in blue and how much solar energy I get from the system in yellow. And so on this day, which was March 18th of this year, I was getting 100% of my energy from solar. I got 18 kilowatt hours that was the system produced. I used 13 kilowatt hours, and I actually sent 5 kilowatt hours back to the grid. So ultimately, PG&E owes me $103. I'm a net prosumer, as they say. I'm actually producing energy, and I'm not the only one. There are thousands of people. I just read the other day that California now has 5% penetration of solar. Hawaii has over 12% penetration of solar, and this is continuing to expand because people are understanding the cost benefit here. I did a sort of quick cost benefit analysis, admittedly in part dependent upon a federal tax credit and a rebate from PG&E, but nevertheless, looking at the whole system, its costs, and the 20-year life, I figured I was getting 12% on my money. Well, where can I go get 12% on my money? You can't get 12%, reliably over a 20-year period anywhere that I know of, legally. So it's something that people are looking at. So, people like this, the gentleman in the orange jacket, Danny Kennedy, who's one of the executives at Sungevity, is becoming, the new utility provider for many people, becoming someone that people are relying on for some level of their utility services. Certainly, they're not getting all their services. It's not a comprehensive service. It's not yet total local reliability. We don't have, Solar City's, Elon Musk's lithium batteries yet. That are being distributed, although Solar City is selling batteries now, packaging them with their solar systems. But you'll see that happening. You'll see the batteries that I showed you from the one company in Pittsburgh as well, Aqueon, that ultimately will become more cost effective. And we'll see a point where reliability will become a local commodity overall, which is something that concerns utilities. And here is why that's happening. This is the cost of solar from 1960 to project it out to 2020 versus the cost of oil, natural gas, and coal at the bottom. As you can see, the curve is going down rapidly and continues to go down. And as a result, here's the curve of the installation of new solar systems in this country from 1985 to 2015. A very rapid escalation. Again, only tiny overall, admittedly, but at some point in time, when you start getting a 40% growth rate, which we're seeing right now, and that 40% growth rate continues over a persistent period of time, it's going to start to be very big numbers, and very big numbers that the utilities are very concerned about, because not only are you seeing the effects of erosion in revenues, but you're seeing things like this, which is they call the duck curve in California. And that is the top part of the curve shows you what the load curve is over a 24-hour period today, or in 2013 and then 2014. And then as you go on down in years, you can see the duck's belly grows. And why does the duck's belly grow? It grows because that represents the middle of the day when you get more and more solar. So you need less and less energy from the generators that the utilities own and operate. You need less and less energy from other sources, and as a result, you have this change in this curve where prices in the middle of the day, actually like they have in Australia, go to zero potentially because they have so much solar in Australia. So the markets at the time that most of the residential and commercial solar are putting out power results in tremendous amounts of ultimate energy being produced during the day. And the utilities worry about this from a revenue standpoint and an operational standpoint as well. These things can be dealt with operationally. From a revenue standpoint, we do need to worry about them. So, antiquated systems, can they be competitive? I mean, this is a substation that is a current picture. It's not one I took 30 years ago. This is what a substation looks like today. And, we have, there's a Tesla driving by right now. Very interesting. And so if we back up that Tesla, and look at it in front of that substation, think about that automobile and the advances that automobile has had since 1920. And then think about that substation and the advances we've seen in that substation since 1920. I mean, you can't recognize the automobile if you were in 1920, but you certainly can recognize the substation. We need to do something to change the whole structure of how we can ensure that utility systems deliver energy much more efficiently. So ultimately, to wrap up here, the grid policies and delivery of energy services, I think the whole policy structure needs to be changed and the whole regulatory structure needs to be changed in a fundamental way. And not one that hasn't been seen before, not one that we haven't already had experience with, not one that we don't have some level of comfort with. I wrote an article in the Public Utilities Fortnightly, August 2014, that I would suggest you read if you're interested in finding more about this idea. And the idea is fairly simple. In this country, we have a wholesale power system that largely, including in Texas, is structured in a way that it's run by an independent system operator. So the wholesale system, both the operation of the grid and the wholesale markets, are done independently by an independent third party that has an independent board of directors that's all under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And the owners of the assets of the transmission systems, the TOs as they call it, transmission owners, all they do is own those assets and they invest in them. They don't operate them, they don't plan on them, they have no responsibility for making the rules for interconnection with those platforms or operating those platforms. They're completely open and transparent platforms that FERC oversees in rules that FERC approves that are developed in stakeholder processes that are independently done. It's a great model. There's 7 large RTOs around the country. I suggest in this article we do the exact same thing for a distribution system. We have an independent system operator for the distribution systems, and ultimately we operate them independently in ways that can improve efficiency, ensure that efficient investments get made, we can lower costs overall for consumers, and ultimately do the right thing. So, finally, what is your opportunity cost? Well, the opportunity cost of you, that is, what are you going to go out and do to save money versus what the utility is going to do to save money is very different. And I found this out recently by riding on the train on the BART from San Francisco to Berkeley. And it was packed in at rush hour, took a picture and shows you all the people around me were like shoulder to shoulder. And I looked down at the ground and I saw this down on the ground. I saw a dollar bill down there. I'm thinking, am I going to lean over and get that dollar bill? I don't think so. I'm not going to get down with those down there where and interestingly enough, then I saw other people looking around me. Nobody else did either. Nobody leaned down to get that dollar bill. So obviously the opportunity cost there was much different than if I'd been walking down the street. And we've got to think about how we can change the opportunity cost model for utilities and their structures in ways that can ensure that they can start doing the correct things, and that is improving the efficiency of the system overall. And so with that, I think we have time, hopefully, for a few questions, a little discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Appreciate
You're welcome.
You want to settle up real quick? We'll just take a couple of quick questions. So you're going to be here for the rest of the day as well, yes?
I am, yes.
Wonderful. So any folks that don't get a chance to ask you a question now, you will have a huddle.
I'll be wandering the halls.
A mass of humanity asking you questions after this. So we have two ladies with microphones. Wave them over here and over here. We have time for 2 questions. Patty is waving, so we'll get Patty the first question, but I also want to get one more question as well. So.
Hi, I'm Patty Duran with the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative, and Mr. Wellinghoff, you had an article published, I think it was Smart Grid Today, just recently, where you talked about the rush to charge for rooftop solar, the rush to change net energy metering policies.
Yes. And
you had some really interesting thoughts, and I wondered if you could summarize those for us today, right now.
Certainly, I would. This whole movement to start charging solar customers for having solar on their roof with a specific connection charge, I think, misdirects the whole argument and the whole discussion. The discussion needs to be around what are the costs and benefits that consumers impose upon the system and how those costs and benefits can be recovered. So if consumers are putting a fixed cost on the system of some kind, because there's customer costs by having a meter on, and there's costs to service their bill, and there's costs to provide a certain amount of distribution system infrastructure, those costs all should be accounted for, and every customer on the system should pay their proportionate, appropriate share. Demand charges should be separate, because if you have different demands at different times of the day and different times of the year, that demand charge should be associated with those, again, costs that you impose by the demand that you impose. But we shouldn't be, discriminating against solar customers because they're doing something that, for whatever reason, is causing utilities to become very uncomfortable. We should instead look at what are the real costs and benefits, and to go to, as much as we can, a market-based system that does impose costs on customers and also provides them with the value for the benefits that their resources provide to the system, and ensures that those costs and benefits are fairly and adequately addressed.
Wonderful. Paul Robbins, I think you had your hand up a second ago. Did you? Can you, Zoe, could you bring a...
Unless there's someone else who...
Paul is one of our greatest energy advocates in Austin, so I definitely want to get you to get a chance to chime in.
Your flattery gets you nowhere.
I know that. I know that with you.
Basically, I wanted to ask Mr. Is it Dr. or Mr.?
Mr.
Mr. Wellinghoff.
Haven't suffered through getting a doctorate yet.
Can you please elaborate on off-grid in Hawaii? I didn't know there was any great percentage of defection, but you study this. Can you elaborate?
Sure. There's not any great percentage of defection. Certainly, people who have the means to do so and can afford to acquire battery resources are doing so to some degree, but I can't say it's large percentages at all. But if you look at the cost benefits of what the rate is to the per kilowatt hour charge in Hawaii versus what it would cost you to put in a solar system and associated storage resources, it's very close. One thing I would emphasize, though, with respect to this, I believe that we shouldn't be looking to or advocating for people going off-grid, in the sense that I believe that all of these distributed resources that consumers are putting in, including solar and storage, and what they're doing with respect to efficiency and controls and communication within their facilities and all their loads are things that are all assets that should be maintained for the grid, because they can, in fact, provide that customer with means to control their costs by using those assets and trying to reveal the value of those assets to the grid and actually monetizing those assets and getting compensation back.
I wish we had more time. We need to, he's going to be around all day, guys. So, so everyone give Chairman Wellinghoff a big round of applause. Thank you so much for your time.